Welcome back to Skylanders in Smash, everybody! Today we're covering the last of the trio from the first game's starter pack, and my personal favorite of the three, the legendary Gill Man, Gill Grunt. A Skylander of the water element, Gill Grunt defeats his enemies by either blasting them away with water or impaling them with harpoons, courtesy of his trusty water/harpoon gun. He also possesses a water jetpack, which he uses to hover above the ground. Just like with Trigger Happy, Gill Grunt is also a fighter that primarily fights with projectiles, as he also never seems to attack foes physically. But unlike the last video, we don't have to worry about two separate movesets, because I have a much clearer idea on what his ideal moveset should be. And of course that involves a bit of inspiration from other characters. Now who else do we know is an underwater creature with a gun?
Patrick, that's a gun.
Yes.
Jokes aside, most of Gill Grunt's moves are going to be based off Inklings, and as you'll soon figure out, in more ways than one. So without further ado, let's get into it. But before we start, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Now, before we get into the attacks themselves, I should mention a certain trait that Gill Grunt possesses in the original games. In Skylanders, both his water gun and jetpack have a limited usage dependent on how much water is left in Gill Grunt's water tank, which is represented by a small gauge. As such, this same mechanic will be present in Smash for Gill Grunt, where like Inkling and their ink tank, the amount of water in his water tank is depicted as a gauge displayed above his damage meter. However, Gill Grunt's water tank is able to refill over time like it does in Skylanders, as opposed to Inkling, who has to manually refill their tank. By now, you've probably guessed that the water gun and jetpack will be included in Gill Grunt's specials, and they will most certainly make use of the water tank. We'll go into more detail about them later in the video. But in addition to that, some of Gill Grunt's basic moves will also use up water from the tank, and we'll get into which ones soon. Speaking of which, let's get into the first move, the neutral attack. I'm thinking that Gill Grunt's neutral attack should be a choosable one standard and one infinite. Let's go into the infinite first, because the move is basically Inkling's rapid jab, where they fire a series of short-range blasts of ink, or in Gill Grunt's case, water. This attack also uses up water from the water tank. As such, the jab does no damage when it's empty. As for the standard jab, while we could also mimic Inkling's standard jab where they end with a kick, I have some other ideas. An interesting detail about Gill Grunt is that, like Trigger Happy, he never physically attacks in Skylanders. So one unique move that I thought up for him is that since the harpoon's head remains exposed while in the gun, Gill Grunt could thrust his harpoon forward like a spear to stab enemies. But I'm not 100% certain on that one, because I think there are other basic moves that are more appropriate for that attack. Next, let's move on to the smash attacks, which I want to preface will all be water-based attacks that consume water from the water tank. Of course, this is meant to emulate some of the traits from Inkling's smash attacks. For instance, if there's no water in the tank, the attack is essentially useless. Let's start with the up smash this time, in which case Gill Grunt shoots a close-range burst of water upwards, like how Inkling does it with their Ink Blaster. I'm starting with this one first because forward smash is basically the same thing, just in either horizontal direction. And finally, down smash is Gill Grunt performing a sort of spin attack while spraying water, dealing damage. The closest comparison is of course Inkling's, but it's certainly not a one-to-one comparison, given that they're using a bucket. Another potential down smash is something similar to Mii Gunner's, where he fires short bursts of water in front of, then behind him. We're moving on to the tilts. Now remember when I mentioned the concept of Gill Grunt using his harpoon gun like a spear? Well, these were the basic moves I was referring to that were much more suitable for that sort of attack. For instance, the forward tilt is simply that. Gill Grunt thrusting his harpoon gun forward to pierce enemies, like how Ridley stabs fighters with his tail. Up tilt is the same thing, just upwards. Simple as that. A good comparison is Meta Knight's up tilt, but down tilt is more open-ended than the rest. While this move could stick with the theme and just have Gill Grunt thrust his harpoon gun downwards, I think there are more appropriate options. Another possibility is him simply sweeping the ground, either with his feet or even the gun itself. But my vote is again a move similar to Mii Gunner's, where he fires a burst of water towards the ground. This would also consume water from the water tank. Up next is the dash attack, which once again copies Inkling's, where they bash fighters with their elbow. Gill Grunt's speed should also be relatively normal, Side note, from now on, I'm just gonna say a Skylander's speed is slow, normal, and fast, instead of making specific comparisons to other Smash fighters' speeds, just to save time. If there's anything noteworthy I want to point out about the fighter's speed, I'll be sure to mention it. On to the aerials. Of all the moves, I had the hardest time with the Nair, because for one, I couldn't think of a good move that involved the water gun. And secondly, Gill Grunt doesn't strike me as a fighter that loves to fight with their arms and legs. But on the other hand, those are the only moves I can think of right now. In that case, I only have two options. Either a head spin attack like Inklings, or a sex kick. A very standard aerial move used by most fighters where they thrust and extend their foot out to attack. Fortunately, the rest of Gill Grunt's aerials are taken care of because I based them all on his harpoon gun. Forward air, for instance, is him executing a 3-pronged attack with his gun, similar to Ridley's forward air. In regards to the back air, up air, and down air, all of these moves are based on Shulk's respective aerials, where Gill Grunt can thrust his harpoon gun backward, upward, and downward. An added detail is that for most of his moves, Shulk's sword has a bit of a delay before revealing its beam blade to attack. His up and down air also hit twice, with the sword first, then the blade. Gill Grunt's harpoon gun would share those same behaviors. Now that I think about it, an alternative for Gill Grunt's forward and up smash would be an imitation of Shulk's, where he would thrust his harpoon gun forward and upward. And speaking of Shulk, we're not done with him yet, as Gill Grunt's throws are essentially in the exact same situation as before, with Shulk's moves being the basis for most of them. More specifically, the back, up, and down throw are pretty much Gill Grunt thrusting his harpoon gun behind, upward, and downward in the same manner as Shulk with his sword. As for the rest of the moves, the grab and pummel are very standard. Gill Grunt simply grabs an opponent and either headbutts or knees them for the pummel. Finally, forward throw would be similar to Inklings, where Gill Grunt blasts their enemy away with a burst of water. Like the smash attacks, this would consume a small amount of water from the tank. And last but least, we have the edge attack, in which case Gill Grunt either swings his water gun to attack, or jabs forward with the harpoon in his gun. That's it for the basic moves. Now we can move on to the meat of this video, the specials and final smash. His neutral special is simple. He simply fires harpoons at his enemies one at a time with each button press. And while this move may be fine on its own, I think it needs a bit more spice to it. Therefore, I've decided to add his soul gem ability, the Anchor Cannon, where he fires a giant anchor that deals massive damage. Now Gill Grunt's neutral special becomes a chargeable move, where Gill Grunt can now use his harpoon gun to assemble the anchor, then shoot it towards his enemies. Additionally, Gill Grunt can move at a slow pace while charging the anchor. Next up, his side special is his Neptune gun, where he can shoot explosive starfish that latch onto fighters, then explode. This move is basically a Mega Man side special, plain and simple. In Skylanders, this move is actually an add-on to the water gun, as it only activates when Gill Grunt is spraying water. But in this context, I think it's much better suited to be its own individual move. Now for the moves that'll probably take up a quarter of this video. The water gun and jetpack, which are the down and up specials respectively. Let's start with the recovery first, because it's actually pretty straightforward. You would think with its appearance that it would behave similarly to Diddy Kong's up special, but in the Skylanders games, Gill Grunt just kind of hovers a few inches off the ground with it, so it doesn't seem to be capable of traveling at high speeds. Therefore, in Smash, I'm thinking it'd actually be closer to Rob's recovery, where he's able to hover in the air until his fuel runs out, or in Gill Grunt's case, until the water tank runs out. And finally, we're on to the last special move, the down special, aka the water gun. So pretty much in the history of Smash, any special move that uses water to attack just simply pushes back fighters. The most iconic examples of this are Mario's Fludd and Squirtle's water gun. More notably, both of these moves need to be charged first in order to be executed. Now we could just have Gill Grunt's water gun behave the same way, but that's, to put it simply, boring. Instead, what I'm proposing is that Gill Grunt's water gun still pushes fighters, but is able to spray water continuously while the move is held until the water tank is empty, functioning similarly to Inkling's neutral special. Now, while I am happy that this move is somewhat unique from the rest of the water-based specials, unfortunately I realized that it may be too overpowered in-game. It reminds me of the Gust Bellows, an item in Smash that blasts wind, which pushes fighters. It's considered by most to be a broken item, as it has the potential to KO players at 0% damage by pushing them off stage. So this move could actually be worse than the Guspelos, since it has a limited supply of ammo, while this move can be used repeatedly. One possible fix to this would be that the water gun consumes water from the tank at a very high rate, which may discourage abusing the move, but I'm definitely not certain on that. I'm guessing this was why Mario's and Squirtle's moves were chargeable, seeing as in the source material for these moves, both Mario and Squirtle were able to spray water continuously. Fortunately, I do have a compromise, which is that the water gun just damages players instead of pushing them, which is how it works in Skylanders. In that case, I'm picturing that it also causes players to flinch when hit, as opposed to Inkling's neutral special. And of course, we could just take the stale route and have the water gun be a chargeable move. All in all, whether the move is chargeable or not, or the water damages or pushes fighters, all of these ideas are possible candidates for Gill Grunt's down special. That's all I have to say about these specials, but I do want to clear something up before we get to the final smash. Now, there is an argument to be made that the water tank aspect of Gill Grunt doesn't need to be included. Not only is it complicated, but it may not even be necessary, since in Skylanders, there's an upgrade for Gill Grunt that allows him to never run out of water. Some counterpoints though. For one, if that was the case, then Gill Grunt's water jetpack would be the most broken recovery in Smash, since it never runs out of water. Also, his water gun would almost certainly be broken if the water pushed players. But ultimately, what it all boils down to is that this is just an idea. I'm not saying this is how it should be for Gill Grunt, but I think it's a cool feature for him that could be implemented if he ever were to be in a Smash game. Regardless, his moveset more or less stays the same with or without the tank. So let's just move on. We've come to the final smash, where interestingly, I found 3 possible choices for Gill Grunt. Up first is a move I actually pitched for Gill Grunt in my very first video, his WoW power from the 4th game, Ride the Leviathan, where Gill Grunt rides a giant beast made of water as they charge through enemies in their path. In Smash, however, unfortunately, it's much less extravagant, as it's pretty much a copy of Ganondorf's Final Smash. Next is Gill Grunt's WoW power from the 3rd game, Anchor Management, where he fires a giant anchor upwards in an arc, and once it lands, starts spinning and pulling enemies into a vortex, trapping and dealing damage to them. The move is more or less unchanged in Smash, but if I'm being honest, I'm not really feeling this one. It seems a little underpowered for a Final Smash, but too overpowered to be a special move. Not that I was planning for it to be one. Which leaves us with our 3rd and final option, where this time we'll be looking at Gill Grunt's supercharger counterpart, Deep Dive Gill Grunt. This version of him carries a trident instead of his signature water gun, where he's able to shoot lightning from it to attack enemies. The specific move we're referencing is his Soul Gem ability, Storm of the Seas, where Deep Dive summons a powerful storm from which lightning bolts strike the ground, severely damaging nearby enemies. As a final smash, the move functions pretty much identical to the original. First, Gill Grunt transforms into Deep Dive, then uses his trident to summon the storm, where lightning bolts strike randomly all over the stage, dealing massive damage to players in range. Personally, it's between the Leviathan or the lightning storm for me. Finally, we've got the skins and various animations. Up first is the on-screen appearance, which is simply Gill Grunt flying onto the stage with his jetpack. Second, we have the taunts, which I'll just burn through really quick because they're very basic. The first references his animation when summoned in the original games, where he poses with his water gun. Second taunt is him raising his water gun in the air and cheering, similar to Inkling's up taunt. And the last taunt is him hovering and spinning in the air with his jetpack, similar to Charizard's side taunt. Next, let's briefly go over the crowd cheer, which is just a standard 2-syllable chant. Gill Grunt, Gill Grunt, Gill Grunt. After that, we have the victory poses. First up is a pose referencing one of his trailers, where Gill Grunt continuously sprays water in all directions, even after the freeze frame. Second is a pose where he flies around with his jetpack, before posing, hovering in the air. And lastly, this is a pose that I actually put a lot of detail in. It starts with Gill Grunt's back to the camera, with only his upper body in frame. Then he peeks behind him before turning around with his water gun in hand. As he turns around, the camera zooms out to reveal that he has an anchor ready to fire in his gun. He poses while brandishing this giant anchor. At last, we've come to the alternate costumes. First and most obvious is Deep Dive Gill Grunt, seeing as we've just talked about him a couple minutes ago. However, it'd be weird for Deep Dive to use Gill Grunt's water gun, seeing as he only uses a trident to attack in the 5th game. But I'll let that slide for now. Next skin is actually something I discovered recently. So there's a spin-off game, Skylanders Ring of Heroes, that has this feature where you can upgrade a Skylander into their awakened form, where not only are they stronger, but they also get a permanent change to their appearance in some way. And most, but not all Skylanders in this game have awakened forms, including Gill Grunt. Awakened Gill Grunt is just him in some sort of scuba gear. I'm not sure what it is exactly, but it counts as a skin. And just to cover my bases, there's also awakened forms for Trigger Happy, Spyro, and even Dark Spyro, or Shadow Spyro, as he's called in the game. Unfortunately, that was all of the official skins I could find, so the next 6 costumes are going to be based on details from these Skylanders games. The next costume is essentially a dark counterpart to Gill Grunt, referencing the evil amphibious Gillman, an evil duplicate of Gill Grunt created by Chaos, the main villain of the Skylanders franchise. Next is a green recolor, referencing Gurglefin, a green Gillman that gets rescued by and later helps the Skylanders in the first game. Then there's a purple and yellow recolor, of course referencing Spyro and Trigger Happy respectively, both of which are included in the Spyro's Adventure starter pack along with Gill Grunt. This next costume I found really amusing. It's Gill Grunt dressed in overalls, which references Snagglescale, a Gillman with a southern accent, who helps and trains the Skylanders in the third game by hosting arena battles. And this last costume is probably the most gimmicky of them all, is Gill Grunt in a tuxedo/suit. This references the Gillman James Prong from the 5th game, which is obviously a play on the character James Bond. And that's it. We are done covering probably the most iconic trio of Skylanders. So from now on, I'm not going to be telling you who the next video is going to be about. It'll be a surprise, so you'll just have to guess who it is until I release it. But I will give you a hint. The next Skylander I'm going to be covering is featured on the box art of Spyro's Adventure. That is it. So I hope all of you enjoyed watching, and I will see all you awesome people soon.